Hey friends, this is Aaron Summers, and welcome to the Church Brain Podcast. Each week, we talk about how churches behave during seasons of stress and transition, and how we as leaders can guide our congregations through those moments with steadiness and clarity. Now, this week in the article from Monday, we discussed why long-term members often resist change during these transition seasons. Why do they do that? We all feel they do, so why do they do that? We talked about how resistance is usually more emotional than leaders first assume. I think sometimes we view it as rebellion when it's just resistance, and we don't understand the differences there sometimes. It's fair. People are often, they're reacting through memory, attachment, maybe accumulated church history and the baggage that comes with that. Or maybe they're uncertain about the future rather than simply reacting to the visible issues itself. And we're going to dive into that in just a second. But today, what I want to do is I want to move us into some practical leadership on this conversation, this topic. So, how do we as leaders guide churches through transition without unnecessarily deepening the fear, the resistance, or the division? Because one of the realities I think we're going to discover is that leading change inside of a church is not simply about vision. It also involves emotional pacing, trust, communication, helping people navigate on and off the map of the things that are going on. We need to do that in a healthy way. So let's walk through five best practices, if you will, that are very important during this transition season. So let's dive in right now. First, ask good questions. I know that sounds awful simple, but it's true. You got to ask good questions. Maybe something to say is you need to ask better questions than you've been asking. You see, one of the easiest mistakes we make is assuming that we already know why people resist, or we walk into the room and we assume we're the smartest person in the room, or we know all the answers already, and we're already setting ourselves up for failure. Churches hear concerns about staffing or worship style, schedules, ministry direction, or change. And we can quickly conclude as church members and leaders, well, people just don't like change. Well, sometimes that's true. I don't always like change either, yet it's a reality of life. We've got to be aware that that's true. Some people just don't like any kind of change. But, and I think we're going to find this through this podcast today, that there may be reasons even for that. And they may have had so much change going on that they just can't handle one more thing. Or the church is the last place of non-change, last place they have some sense of control and stability and ritual with. And changing that can really upset some people. But good questions can help us all slow down long enough to understand what people are actually experiencing emotionally. For example, here's a question. And this isn't a question to ask the people, all right? This is a question you ask while you're in your office, you're thinking, you're praying, you're trying to decipher what to do. What are people afraid of losing? Now, you've been hearing resistance. You've been wanting to lead some change. You've been wanting to help them understand it's change or die. And we bring up all kinds of illustrations about that. Oh, our trajectory is downhill. We're declining. We need to make some changes. Otherwise, we're not going to make it through this season. And that's fearful kinds of language. And people pick up on that. And they're going to pick up on you being fearful about that. So what do you do? Well, you need to be asking yourself about your people. What are people afraid of losing? What is it they're afraid of losing? Now, don't come at this from an automatic negative perspective. Oh, they're losing control. They're losing power. They're losing authority. No, maybe that's true, but be honest about it. Maybe they just fear losing stability, or they fear losing a ritual that has meaning and significance to them. And I think that kind of maybe changes how you lead through that if you will emotionally connect with what it is they fear losing. Another question. What does this change represent emotionally to the congregation? What does this change represent? What does this mean for them? See, we can come in as leaders and we can say, well, within a 2 or 3 Sundays with them, we need to change this. We got to adjust this. This has got to go. This has got to stay. And we get so clean cut on some of these things that we forget sometimes people are emotionally attached to these things, right or wrong. They're emotionally attached, and we've got to be aware of those attachments, is we have to understand, what does this represent emotionally for this congregation? Maybe that memorial that is out front means something to them long before you ever arrived on the scene. In fact, you might not even know why that memorial is there, and that's the other issue. Maybe you need to understand, why is that even here? What does it represent? Another good question. Are people reacting to this issue itself, or are they reacting to the accumulation of several changes happening too quickly? See, sometimes we just take the rip the band-aid approach off. We just rip off the band-aid. Just get it done. Let's just make all these changes and then we're going to be fine on the other side. The problem is you may be fired on the other side. You got to realize that. You have got to understand that. Are they really reacting to this issue, or is it that we've been throwing so much at them so quickly that they're just overwhelmed, they can't handle it? And before we start off onto, well, they're grown-ups, they should be able to no, they don't. They can't handle it. You couldn't handle it if it was being done to you. So we have to understand, and we have to ask these good kinds of questions. These questions matter because resistance it's often cumulative. A church may appear to be reacting strongly just to one decision, when in reality, people are emotionally responding to months or even years of accumulated uncertainty. For example, you come into this church after they've had 2 years of a pastorless transition, or you come into a church where the community has had massive growth, but the church hasn't, or flip that. The church has tried to grow, but the community has been in decline. They're going through some stuff. And if we come in and just want to set up our vision, like the lemonade stand on the corner, and expect everybody that drives by to want to stop and get some lemonade, it's not going to happen. I tell that story because at the entrance of our community, I've got these 3 girls. They set up this lemonade stand every day, and I don't want lemonade, and I don't want their lemonade. I don't even know if they wash their hands or not. Why do I want to drink their lemonade? I don't want it. You know, I applaud their entrepreneurial spirit, but I just don't want their lemonade. And the same thing is true about your vision, your decisions, if you will. You've got to be careful about that. I worked with a church where tension was rising. And it initially looked like a fairly minor worship adjustment. From my perspective, I don't know, what's the big deal? And from some of the leadership, they didn't understand. So they became frustrated because the reaction from the people felt completely out of whack. I mean, it's completely disproportionate to the actual change being discussed. But after we had some listening sessions, after we had some conversations about it, it became obvious the issue wasn't really the issue. The church had experienced staff transitions, ministry shifts, organizational changes in a pretty short amount of time. And long-term members, they didn't feel emotionally grounded in the church that they had known for years. So this one issue simply became the place where all the emotions spilled out. Now, if you react poorly to that, you don't ask good questions, you're never going to know what to do with that. All right. Here's the second thing we need to do. So first, you ask good questions. Now, what do we do next? Review the map. This is what I call reviewing the map. One of the things that lowers anxiety inside of churches is helping people understand where the church is, where it's headed, and why certain decisions are being made along the way. You're just reviewing the map. This is where we've been. This is where we are. Hey, this is where we want to go. You may call it gap analysis in business trends and books. You may do a SWOT analysis and find out some of these things. but you've got to help people understand the map. You got to help people understand where you've been, where you are, where we're going. Now, another part of reviewing the map is understanding this. You're going to be, as the leader, you're going to sit anywhere from 6 months to a year ahead of where they are. Now, what do I mean by that? You've already been dreaming this up. You've already been thinking this through. You've already been hashing this out in your mind or your prayer time or your Bible study time, and you've got this, you've already hammered this out, you've got it out. You really don't want any questions because in your mind, you've already answered all the questions that could ever be asked about this. And if John asked me one more question, see where it goes, see what happens. You are so far ahead that they're not. You got to stop and review the map. You have to every now and then remind yourself, I'm here, but they are not here. And you've got to understand where are you? Not only where is the church and where are we going, but you have to understand where am I and where are they, because that's almost always different. In fact, good leadership is always going to be ahead of the curve. You're going to be ahead of your congregation, but you have to also understand where they are right now. That thing that you have worked over in your mind and heart for the last 6 months, this is the first time they're hearing of it. And so if you approach it as if, well, everybody should just get on board because this is the new vision, they're not going to do that. Leader, listen to me. They're not going to do it because it's the first time they've heard it. And so we have to help walk them in and work them into it. We talk about cascading communication in revitalization and how we just kind of drip this information out until it finally gets into the majority language. And that takes time, but it's so helpful here. See, people can become more settled when they begin to understand where are we right now? What challenges are we trying to address? What actually is going to be changing? What's staying the same? And what are we trying to become over time? These are all important questions that people may not articulate very well. They may not ask it real well, but we sometimes underestimate how disorienting transition can feel to congregations. When churches lose their sense of location, anxiety can rise real quick. So, reviewing the map helps restore that clarity. Speaking of clarity, that's our third thing. We got to clarify the real issue. Because here's the thing, there's the presenting issue, and then there's the real issue. Because oftentimes the symptom isn't the actual sickness. So churches can spend months arguing over visible issues while the actual issue underneath simply remains unnamed, unchecked, unwarranted, not handled. So a worship discussion may actually be an identity discussion. Well, this is who we've been for 50 years, and now you want to change that. That's identity. You're getting at the heart and the root of people. And I'm not saying the identity doesn't need to change. I'm just saying we got to understand, we have to clarify what's the real issue. Don't fight about a worship discussion if the real conversation needs to be identity. A staffing disagreement could just be a trust issue. Look, you come in as the pastor or the leader, or you're the new chairman on a committee, and you want to establish control and authority, right? I know it sounds nice, but if the people that you are working with don't trust you yet, don't push that too hard because you're going to have some problems. So you can have all these disagreements, and you can think poorly of those that are serving with you, but the reality is they just don't trust you yet. They don't know how to do that yet. Resistance to a ministry adjustment may really reflect fear about this pace of change. Well, we just changed something. Now in your mind, you're thinking, well, that was months ago. What difference does that make? They're just now getting used to it. You see how the pace has to match the people. So this is why leaders need to work carefully to separate the stated issue from the emotional issue, from the symbolic issue, and the trust issue. We have to separate all these things and treat them separately instead of trying to just mow our way through it. Otherwise, churches are going to spend enormous amounts of energy debating surface level problems while the deeper concerns continue to erode at the entirety of the congregation. and they'll be unresolved, which is going to become a root of bitterness. One of the most helpful questions you can ask during tense moments like this is this: what problem are we actually trying to solve right now? Is it really about moving the offering from the middle to the end? Is it really about not wearing robes in the choir? Is it really about 10:50 instead of 11 o'clock for worship? Is it really about our passing the plates or not passing the plates? Is it about those things specifically? Or is there something else? What problem are we really trying to solve? All right, so ask good questions, map it out, clarify. Now, we got to speak with honor and respect. That's number 4. Speak with honor and respect. The emotional tone that you use during this transition, it matters a lot. And it matters a lot more than we may realize, because churches under stress hear emotionally loaded language loudly. I've seen leaders unintentionally, myself too, unintentionally create enormous resistance simply because they spoke about the past with frustration instead of gratitude. Maybe you've used a statement like this: we've got to stop living in the past. We can't keep doing things the old way. It's a new day. And this creates defensiveness um, immediately, because long term members, this is what they really hear: everything you invested in no longer matters. Now, maybe that's true, right? But just don't come out and say that. This is an emotionally charged situation, and you've got to be careful how to do that. Maybe we need to say something like this: this church has a strong history, and we want to build on that foundation wisely moving forward. We want to make sure that we honor and respect the shoulders on which we stand today. See, this is honoring the past. You don't have to live in the past, but you need to take a peek at it, and honoring that helps. Maybe instead of, if we don't change, we're going to die, maybe we say something like this: one of our responsibilities is making sure that there's still a strong gospel presence in this community for years to come. And so let's gather together and do all that we can to keep that gospel presence here. You know, that can come across better than coming in and saying, you don't have any money, you don't have any people, so you're going to die. So this is what we need to see. It's different. Those statements that I'm sharing with you, they communicate the need for change, but they can lower the emotional threat, and they preserve dignity and respect. And I'm telling you, when we get to this final piece, you're going to need that. Churches generally move through change more healthily when people feel honored during the process. So, what's that final one, that 5th one? So, we're going to ask good questions, map it out, clarify the real issues. We're going to speak with honor about the history. And then finally, we have to move at the speed of trust. Move at the speed of trust. And this can be one of the hardest lessons for us to learn as leaders, because we can see clearly what needs to happen. We know what needs to happen. We know when it needs to happen. We know why it needs to happen. We might even know how it needs to happen. You can be right in all of those things, but if the church doesn't trust you or the plan, nobody's going anywhere. Why? Because they're going to move at the speed of trust. When trust weakens, even a little bit, things now start to feel like a threat. But when trust strengthens, churches become far more willing to walk through difficult change together. And it doesn't mean to avoid hard decisions. That's not the point. Sometimes you have to pull the trigger, but you better have high discernment to know when that is. Some congregations genuinely need significant adjustment, but you still have to build the trust to make it happen. You've got to have a relational trust built up, almost like uh, almost like a fund in a bank. It's got to be built up, so when you start making those withdrawals, you don't find yourself insufficient. Sometimes slowing the process just a little bit will help the church actually move faster and further over time. because now people remain emotionally connected to the journey. Where inside your church might resistance actually be revealing a sense of fear, uncertainty, grief, or maybe weakened trust underneath the visible disagreement? Leading change inside churches requires more emotional patience than we expect. They're not as on board as we think they are. People are not simply reacting to the decisions, they're carrying memory, attachment, history, disappointment, fear, and love for the church and God and the gospel into every transition conversation. And churches usually navigate change best when leaders can remain calm enough to listen carefully, communicate clearly, and help people process this uncertainty without creating more anxiety along the way. Hey, thanks for spending a few minutes with me today. If this episode was helpful, I hope that you'd share it with another leader that's in transition and walking through change inside their congregation. Make sure you subscribe to the Church Brain to get the weekly briefings, these kinds of podcasts, and some other items that you can find on the Substack, thechurchbrain.substack.com. Remember, churches often move through change more faithfully when leaders focus not only on where the church is going, but also on how people are experiencing the journey getting there. And never forget, none of this surprises the Lord. He's already at work where you are.